go ahead and get started because I know some members have to step out soon. So we're going to take up the HC 19 first, the school facilities surcharge bill. So first of all, I'd like to thank Stacy for all of your work on this. I know you've got repeated calls from many members about this, and I certainly appreciate your help with this and also with the interlinear copy, because Stacy did have to go ask for a special permission to do that because it's not a final bill yet, and so to be able to do that, she had to get permission to do that, so appreciate that. She also was able to work on a series of amendments for folks, and so I think what we would like to do, and I think this went out by email earlier, is to set aside that prior vote that we took at the end of Wednesday's session, last Wednesday's session, because there was a lot of confusion amongst the members as to what that vote was about. So, so if we were to set that aside, I think moving through the bill, and all of you now should have an interlinear copy of the bill. I think the next provisions, which is the last one that we were talking about on Wednesday of last week, was about the exemptions to the language that was already adopted for enabling to the council. The suggestion, yeah.
I left my interlinear copy of all my notes back in my office. Do we have a clean interlinear?
It's in your binder. It's actually in your binder.
Oh, okay. It's in my binder. Great. Yep. Thank you. But I can go with that.
It's in the binder behind the amendments. There's some proposed amendments. There's also a chart that Stacy worked on, which I think is very helpful for folks to understand where the provisions currently lie between the original version, the work group amendments, and the current law. Behind that is the interlinear copy. So if we were to look at the exemptions at this point, and what I would like to do is offer an amendment to address the technically complete provision. And that amendment is, I think it's the second amendment, third amendment that's in your packet. It's got the parentheses rate setting authority. Sorry, these amendments aren't numbered. It's the amendment that says rate setting authority. And what it basically does is allow since the current form of the LR has the enabling authority to the county council to decide and set the impact fees, this language in this amendment would also give them the authority to set different rates depending on where these developments are in the development process. So it's fully enabling them to address the rate setting depending on where developments are in that process. So that's what this amendment does. Stacey, does that kind of sum up this amendment?
I don't know that I understand that.
Could you start by reading the amendment so I'm sure I'm looking at the right?
Sure. So the amendment is at the top says rate setting authority.
Yeah.
The amendment changes the rate setting authority.
Imposing different amounts
Oh,
based
send
on the
land.
classification.
That's not the only one. Send land. What's that?
Imposing different amounts based on the classification of the residential.
Yeah, so it says imposing different amounts based on the classification of the residential new construction as determined by the county council. It also changes the dates at which the rate is grandfathered in. So the dates have been changed to June 30, 2019. That was because Delegate Feldmark had pointed out that if we set it as July 1st, and we set the effective date of the bill also as July 1st, the council could, as of July 1st, change it to a different rate, and then it would be grandfathered and set at that rate if they did all of that on the same day. So this changes those grandfathering dates to June 30th. Yeah,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just to clarify that last point, the issue is we're trying to tie it to the current rate, which extends through June 30th. July 1st is when the new rate, whatever the council may set it to be, goes into effect. So that's the.
Move approval of the amendment.
Second.
Discussion.
Yeah, second the discussion.
Second. My question is imposing, because I'm not looking at where it's sitting, imposing different amounts based on the classification. What's the classification referring to? What is the class?
If you look at page 4 on your interlineated copy.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're tucking this into paragraph 2 here. So we're saying the county council may enact a local law that provides for an annual adjustment in the amount of the school facility surcharge under paragraph 1I of this subsection in the following manner. So these are the ways that they could adjust the surcharge. First, the increase or decrease of the general category. Two, they could decrease the amount of the surcharge for senior housing, and then this is new, or they could impose different amounts based on the classification of the residential new construction, and the classification would be able to be determined by the county council.
What is classification?
Well, in this case, we've classified it as senior housing. So we made a determination that certain housing can be termed senior
I
housing.
thought the amendment had to do with,
I think this amendment just deals with the
Stage in the
the
process.
stage in the process. Sorry.
I think.
So instead of saying it's technically complete or a building permit process, that can be determined by the county council.
Could I offer what I think would be a friendly amendment here as we look more carefully at the wording? What if we said based on the classification or status in plan review process?
Not classification, it's the status of the plan review process.
Well, but I thought we wanted to also give the council the authority to set different rates for different.
They already
Okay,
had
so-
that earlier, we don't want them to change it, that's a
Okay.
different amendment.
Okay,
So Stacy kind of looked at the law and said that the concern is that the council may not be able to set different rates depending on the status or classification of that development in the process, because it's a little bit of a gray area. So if we wanted the council to have the authority to set different rates for developments that are in different stages of that process, we do need to give them enabling language to do that, if that's the intent of the delegation.
But classifications is not about where they are in the process, it's about what kind of development they are. And you're getting into two different things, and you want it to be relating to status in process, not classification.
So this is in place of
It's
the technically complete.
I think
So
this is
we
the
might
wrong
have had
location.
this pick because
Right.
that's not how
Right,
it's.
this is the wrong location. This is the wrong location, this would have to go,
Right,
I believe, under,
You could,
C on page
you
3.
could leave it here, but you could make that change to status class.
Status
Yeah.
and get rid of
Yeah.
classification.
Right.
You don't want
Okay.
to deal with classification in this amendment. If you want to deal with classification, that's another issue. If this is about status, it's about status in the process.
So it's about status in the process. Senator Kazan?
That's fine. I just was trying to understand, though, we had put, in Delegate Treasurer, we had put in the uncodified language in saying that they should consider things like possible different rates for different classifications. And I think that's what you're thinking about, because we already put that in.
We've already specified the different rates for the different classifications.
In uncodified language, and the question
This
is,
is not non-codified language. We've told them that the senior housing and affordable housing are treated differently in codified language.
no, I'm talking, go to the very end of the,
But
let me ask
On
Stacy,
page
David.
3.
I think we're muddying the waters with that word at all.
Did you, we had a conversation
We
about
did.
talking to the Attorney General
Yes.
and whether or not they, I wanted to make sure that they had the freedom to do the things that were listed in the uncodified language at the back.
Right, and he's correct. We also had this conversation. I did go to the AG and we had a conversation about 2 points. One of them was, does the county council, the way the bill is drafted, have the authority to enact different surcharges for different classifications? And the AG said, it is not clear. You could broadly interpret this language that would allow that, but you could also definitely read it to say the delegation had specifically considered that point and did not expressly include language in there. Their recommendation was if you wanted to be certain that the county council had that authority to make different rates based on different classifications, that express language was the way to go. The other was, could they specifically exempt other classifications? For example, you have exempted from any surcharge senior affordable housing. The answer to that is no, because the language specifically says on page 4, And that new paragraph B, the county council may not impose a surcharge that's less than the amount imposed on, would be June 30th, 2019. So that is a floor, and that they would not be able to outright exempt. But the question about whether they could determine their own classifications and charge different rates was not clear.
Why
So
would
the
they?
intent of this was to replace the technically complete language. 'Cause I think there was some
She's talking about
discomfort there.
something entirely different.
Then if we want, let me ask this.
If you want it to do technically complete, and that's what the amendment is, I think it needs to do that. If you want to talk about this other stuff, that's fine, but that's not what you're trying to do, and this amendment does other things.
The
So I
technically
apologize, if
complete-
that was your intent, then I misunderstood your
The
intent.
technically complete, which is on page 3 in the interlinear, if that's what we want to address, then, well, you're maybe still on the floor. But, I mean, but what I would suggest is that we discuss removing that language.
Well, I would,
My understanding was that the intent of this amendment was not to remove it, but to, rather than specifying a particular status cutoff point, to give the council the authority to set a cutoff if they.
Right, but as long as we're designating technically complete as a cutoff point.
Right.
Then
Right, so this
that-
should be
But this would be
replacing, right,
Should be replacing.
right.
Okay, so the first thing is, maybe if we vote whether we're going to accept or not accept that amendment, the technical complete, if we vote it down, then we don't have to replace it.
that's a good question.
We do have to replace because they won't have the authority to set different rates for developments or in different.
Did we
safety
vote on
rates.
that part of the amendment already though? In other words, I don't think we adopted the technical complete language.
It's in the LR, right? That was the work group's amendment. So that's why.
We did not adopt
It
the
was not the
amendment.
workers amendment, one, and two, we did not adopt that.
Right, but it's,
I agree. Well,
So,
look, if I may, there was a lot of confusion at the end of the last meeting. The bottom line is, in my opinion, every member should get to vote understanding and do what they want to do. There was a sort of a confusion of procedure and all that. All that, in my opinion, is a bunch of nonsense with this body. We're all friends here. We all should be working together. Everybody should get to vote the way we want to vote. So I think at the end of the day, probably most people would prefer that we just give the council the ability to do whatever grandfather they want. And let's do it, because I think that's where everybody's head is my guess. Is that accurate?
to me it is.
Yes.
Delegate Rouser.
So, just as a point of clarification, because I'm finding it, like Senator Gazzoni said, and I do agree with you on that. I'm finding it very confusing. Is the interlineated version the current version of the bill?
We did not vote on every
So,
element of the
is there-
intermediate.
is there a reason-
It's the original bill with the major composite amendment that we were working through.
Well, is there a reason that we couldn't just go through each issue and amend the, amend the bill itself, just so that it's clear to everybody? Are we voting on seniors? Are we voting on technically complete? Let's just
So
take
let's-
each issue and just amend the bill.
Okay, Thelma.
well, I think from my perspective, part of the confusion that emerged last week was that we had an amendment that was moved and seconded. We had a proposed amendment to the amendment, which passed. And then we had a proposed amendment to the amendment, which was to keep what was in the moved and seconded amendment. And that was the source of confusion. Sort of, we were voting on an amendment that wasn't changing anything. We have an amendment that's been moved and seconded. I don't think we need to go through point by point to see if we agree with it. People can propose changes to it. That's what these draft amendments to amendments do.
Well, that's, my proposal was that it's confusing. We only have a limited amount of time here. If we went through every issue, going through the bill itself, I think it would be,
So what I propose is let's look at the LR that's in your packet and let's start there. Because
the
that's
LRs,
the
the
draft. The
the draft
interlinear
bill.
copy.
So the interlineated,
Because that shows the changes.
That shows the
and stuff.
changes that we were discussing last week. So let's start there, and if anyone has motions or moves to change things, not reaffirm or keep, but to change what's in this interlineated copy, let's start. Okay, is that clear? So I would like to take out the technical, the amendment is to take out, so my amendment to the amendment is to take out technically complete.
And what page is that on?
That's on page 3, paragraph B. So I'll withdraw the previous amendment.
I'll withdraw it since I actually offered it.
So the amendment on the table now is to remove subparagraph B on page 3. That's the technically complete.
Are you putting something in its place, or are you just leaving the silent on grandfathering?
So moving to take that out, and I think the conversation that Stacy and I had that I think we miscommunicated here was to, in its place, enable the council to decide where developments are in their stage, and if they want to grandfather them, they can do that.
Could we say to determining a fair grandfathering process for developments in process?
So Stacy will have to write this, so is that okay? Or
I mean, you could take the amendment that we drafted, because it's in the right location, if you just want, this is the manner in which they can pass a local law. So we're saying, these are the ways you can change the surcharge, and in this case, if you wanted to say that you can establish a grandfathering process for various stages of development, sure. I mean, the amendment itself is drafted in the right spot, except it doesn't include the removal of the language of technically.
I'm concerned about category or whatever.
You
that
can take
word
it
is.
out, you can amend this amendment to say what you wanted to say, you don't have to adopt it just because.
Why
it's
would
written
we not just put right here that the council would determine a fair grandfathering process?
out. Nothing wrong with
Because that seems very clean and simple, since that's where we are and that's where we're talking about grandfathering.
Let me suggest this, and we've done this before. Let me suggest that we vote rather than on the specific wording on what it is we're trying to do, and then leave council. And so the question is, are we comfortable, or who is comfortable by a vote with removing technically complete and any word that tells the council how they should determine what, if any, properties are going to be grandfathered? And just leave it
the
up.
council can write that up. Is that the
To remove
intent?
anything?
Say again.
Is that what you said, just to clarify? You said to remove any,
In other words, leave grandfathering up to them. They can determine what, how, and in what manner. That is what we're voting on, Delegate Feldman.
So my question is just to clarify that we would explicitly say we are leaving grandfathering up to them,
So-
not be silent on it.
Right, so what we've done before, in years past, is we have come to general agreements about what we want. We've had council then send around the language, and then we voted in that we agree that that language works to that intent. So we don't have to wordsmith it during work session.
Is everyone clear about that? Delegate
Just a question, so is our amendment going to be relevant to, I think, Delegate Pendergrass's question? It's going to be about stage of where they are in the process, or is it also going to be about classification? Or is it going to be neither? Are we just going to leave it completely open?
I think the idea is to let them determine if there's.
Okay, so we're on stage of, I don't know what, I've lost the term, but where they are in the process. Okay, so I think somehow that should be part of the language, if everybody agrees.
No objection?
Okay.
Okay.
All those in favor?
All those in favor? Any objections? All right.
Can I try to maybe resolve that second issue? And Stacy, if we just put something in front of the codified language that said, and the council should have the authority to act upon these issues that they should consider. Can we just come up with something like that?
I think you could, construction language, this section may not be construed to limit the authority of the county council to And yeah, to act upon the issues set forth in this paragraph.
Other paragraphs?
What are we trying to accomplish? I'm very confused about this.
So if they look down that list, right, and one of the things that.
The list on page what?
The last page, 7. We came up with this list of things that they should think about when they're doing this, right? Now, if they were to come to the conclusion that, for instance, the potential for charging different amount for different size residents, that they thought that was a good idea.
Wait, they already,
No, read the list down there.
they charge a different amount for different size because it's a percentage of the square footage, so a different size house is more expensive.
You could charge a different rate for different size units.
You could also try a different mechanism, like you could charge by, as I think one of the council people indicated, they could charge by the number of bedrooms, they could charge by, a lot of other things.
But they're charging by square footage, which basically accomplishes the goal of charging based on sort of the size and price of the house. Why would you do that?
What has been suggested by the council, at least one of the council people, is that there are a variety of different ways that you can choose to impose the fee, and they would like the flexibility to determine whether the way it's been done for the last 20 years is the proper way. They want to impose a fee. They're asking for maximum flexibility in determining the best way for that to be accomplished.
Excuse me, I'm sorry I have to interrupt you, but I've got to go to a 9 o'clock meeting with the speaker, so I have to leave, but I will vote on the issues afterwards, as is allowed, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, I think Senator Penner, Delegate question.
It seems to me that we've given them a lot of flexibility in this bill, and I in general think that what we probably should do is if they find something that we have left out and they want to tweak it in another year or 2, we could come back and deal with that. I'm
That's fine.
I'm
You
happy
can
to
do
be
that's fine.
outvoted,
That's
but
fine.
I just
I'm
think there's a
done.
lot of stuff in
I'm
here.
done.
To the point of the council's input, this bill is not a surprise. I just want to be clear about this. This bill was heard back in November. We did not hear from the council until last week, and then we had a flurry of communication from the council. Delegate Gilman.
I would just say that I agree with Shane, Delegate Pendergrass, particularly with respect to this provision, because since it's already done by square footage and that does have a difference, it sounds like we might leaving it be open to someone who wanted to make distinctions between the types of areas, which I think would be probably unconstitutional, but I think I'd rather not put that in here.
Delegate Alexander. That's what I was expressing.
Well, I agree that with Delegate Pendergrass about that the by square footage makes sense. I also think that the council members who, in their defense, this is not new, but the idea that we were going to restrict them and potentially keep, 4,000 or 5,000 units from increasing in the fee, I think is new. And so I think that's what they were reacting to. I support giving them as much discretion in this. I liked what Senator Gazzoni said about just enabling them, like telling them the fact. I thought you were talking about all things, but maybe we're only talking about the grandfathering, but telling them these factors and giving them the authority. I think that's a cleaner way to do it, giving them the authority to put restrictions or do their own thing based on this. I like that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I agree, this has been going on for over a year, but some of these issues just came up within the last 2 weeks. So I think that's what the county was responding to. And I mean, I was outvoted. I wanted to put a number in there, but if the will is not to put a number in there, then we should give them authority to do whatever they want. I mean, that just seems to make sense. That's what they all wrote in, saying they have the tools. That was the argument used and we voted on the number, they have the tools to figure out the number, they have the tools to figure out what exemptions. So I don't think we should be figuring that out. They have the tools to figure out the grandfathering. They have all that. I mean, the fact that we're having this much discussion and all these different questions just shows that we don't have enough information to figure this out. So I'm in support of just a general giving them authority to do these things that we listed.
Stacy?
What
No,
do you-
delegate.
Oh, there's somebody else first, come on now.
No.
I was gonna ask council, what would you, if you've heard the sentiment, what we're trying to do is figure out how to move this bill forward, giving them maximum authority to the points that Delegate Pendergrass has made, not changing perhaps the methodology. What would you suggest we need to do at this point? There are a number of amendments that here, Senator Hester has an amendment that we have not even considered.
You could just be very straightforward, just say the local law, they can do it in this manner. They can increase or decrease the amount. They can deal with, establish a grandfathering process based on status in the process of development. They can establish exceptions or classifications of various types of properties. You want them to have that authority, just say it. That's all you have to do is just,
Does anybody
say it. There's no question
Yes.
about what the authority they have is, and then
do accept, right? Delegate Pendergrass.
We set out a framework that was here, and today is whatever day of the session it is, and I am comfortable with where we've been on the basics of the things we're letting them do, that we're not deviating too far from what the old law was, that we're trying to, this is a new council, we're trying to give them the authority to do new things and in particular raise the rates. That's the thing they asked us to do, was to be able to raise the rates because they need more money for schools. I don't think we have to blow up what's already there. And yes, it's true, I have some pride of ownership that we did this originally. But it's also true that I believe that you don't have to blow everything up at once, that you can give them the authority to raise more money without changing all kinds of everything else. And the grandfathering, we don't understand, simply put, so I think that they need to have the authority to deal with that. Whatever we did in the beginning, I don't even remember, but it doesn't apply at this point in time because it's different. So I don't feel comfortable with this amendment.
You know what?
There is,
There's no amendment.
I don't think that was what-
There is no.
there is no new,
I don't feel
it was
comfortable.
just a discussion, there was
Yeah,
no,
I
there
just
was
don't
nothing.
feel comfortable with doing what we're discussing.
Are we, so, is the status of this, in your opinion, Chairman, Chair, that we have made that one last change and that we have to vote on the amendment as amended? Is that where we are?
Yeah, so
We
we
did.
basically,
I know,
we already
we
voted,
did
we
vote on the
voted, we
amendment.
voted to allow council to come up with
Come
language that
The
allows
grandfather.
the grandfathering to go.
All right, I'm
Okay,
gonna move
so
the
we're
amendment.
removing
I'm
it
gonna move
technically
the vote to
complete
the-
and adding the grandfathering language. That's how I understood the discussion to be.
I thought when we were
We already
discussing, I'm sorry, I thought what we were discussing was that with regard to the other factors as
So I
well.
think that's already.
Or
done.
all the other factors, not just grandfathering. I mean, we still have, I'm unclear on where we are on a whole host of these issues that are in this.
So do you have-
Are we
do you have
still
a
ex-
motion?
We're still working through this, though.
If I don't know if there's already something on the table, but I
There
would
is
move
not.
to give
I
them the
move- I
authority
move
to
the-
do any of these.
I move the amendment as amended. You can have a discussion
What
after that.
amendment is
He's
that?
calling it the consensus
The,
amendment, the interlineated.
interlineated copy.
You're talking about the grandfathering.
No, I'm talking
No,
about.
we already did the
whole-
grandfather. We talked
I'm
about-
talking
Just
about the
amended the
whole thing.
grandfather now.
Interlineated.
Yes,
Who was second?
with it being amended by the grandfather
Second.
language.
Okay, but what are we, what is being excluded? Can we try to understand that? What is being excluded here? Because we have additional data that what was being discussed last week, I understand some of it's technically complete, some of it's senior. I don't know where we are in the senior housing. I think I understand.
So-
Try to answer that. Yeah. My understanding of where we are, and Stacy, can you be ready to back up here? My understanding of where we are is that we set the rate for senior housing at $1.32. Done.
And they can't change it.
I think they can go down, is that correct? They can
Okay.
go down.
Go ahead and finish, no, we didn't vote on that part.
We are,
It's in the
it's in the bill, it's in the amendment, is what we're talking about right now. And that senior housing that is designated as affordable will not pay any. Other than that, I don't think there's anything else
That's
there.
So if you look at your chart, that is reflected in the chart. That chart reflects those things. All of those things are reflected there. And then it's been changed by the amendment on which you voted, which removes the technically complete language and installs the language or adds in the language that says it can establish a grandfathering process based on the status of processing development or whatever that language will be. Plus, you changed the date from July 1st, 2019 to June 30th, 2020. That is where I understood your amendment was, and that is what you voted affirmatively for.
And I'm moving an amendment to change the consensus or the work group amendment, not a consensus, the work group amendment where it says they can increase or decrease the regular housing, but can only decrease the affordable, to say that the council can increase or decrease, and that's this Hill amendment.
Increase or decrease any?
They can increase or decrease any.
Second.
Any including senior housing?
Including senior, if they decide that 136 is not sufficient, they can change it up or down. And it does, it's no longer the ceiling, it is the ceiling and the
Basic?
You have an amendment on the floor, though. The zoning was
Here's
First
the
and
big
second.
amendment, so I'm amending that.
She's amending.
I'm amending
She's
that.
amending the amendment.
Right,
She's amending.
That's right.
So-
Right, proceed.
So say that again. That's
all right,
okay.
so in the work group amendment, there is language, it says on page 4, actually on the interlineated copy,
The interlineated copy is the work group amendment.
that is the work group
Except for that.
Fair
one
enough.
amendment.
Thank you.
Okay.
And so this is not correct, and it should be page 4. On mine should say page 4, not page 3. But if you look down under 2, Roman numeral 1, it says, subject to paragraph 3 of this subsection, an increase or decrease in the amount of the school facility surcharge under paragraph 1.1 of this subsection, or a decrease in the amount of the school facility surcharge under paragraph 1I2A of this subsection. 1I refers to the regular, and 1I2A refers to the senior. So as written, the work group amendment would only allow an upward or downward on regular, and the only thing the council could do to senior housing is to decrease it further. What I am proposing is they have the ability to increase and decrease all of the housing, the regular and the senior housing, and that we don't limit them on the senior housing.
So you made a
Senator
motion.
Clement.
So, look, I believe we've discussed these issues for a while now. And I believe that there are a number of us who believe that when this was established years ago, it was a mistake made. And the senior housing should not be included at all. As a compromise to that, it seemed reasonable to let them pay at the rate that is established currently in law. But it is my opinion, if I had my way, we take it completely out of there. Because it just doesn't make sense to me. I mean, there is no nexus, there's no logical nexus, particularly when seniors are gonna be paying all the other normal taxes they do, and I think they gladly do it for a better community and those things, but it just doesn't make sense in the context of raising the price on senior housing when we're trying to encourage seniors to stay in the community.
Sorry.
So, with that being said, I would argue strongly against this, and quite frankly, if the council decides that they need more money, they can raise more money by raising it on the other parts of the community,
Or the
It
property tax.
or the property tax, absolutely.
So Delegate Pendergrass, you were gonna say something, and Delegate Peraza, and then Delegate Jones.
I wasn't gonna say something, but I appreciate it, and I would agree with Senator Gazzone.
Delegate Peraza?
Yeah, I do think there may be some logic to looking at how senior housing fits into this and potentially reducing it, but I think there's 3,000 units coming in senior housing, and I think that is a large chunk of this, or 2,500, what have you. That's a large chunk of the expected increased revenue from changing the surcharge. And I think that is something that the council should be looking more closely at. And there are all sorts of different types of senior housing, and there may be certain types that they want to exclude. There might be certain types that they want to charge a different rate for. So I think we should be authorizing the council to look at that either way. So I support Delegate Hill's motion.
Delegate Feldmer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with Senator Gazzoni and Delegate Pendergrass. I share accepting this as a compromise position. I think we need to be careful about the fact that the easiest people to tax are the ones who don't live in our county yet. Okay, and so this is the easiest tax or fee to increase, but it's not supposed to be a general tax. It is a school impact fee. It is a school facility surcharge. We're talking about units that do not have a direct impact on school enrollment. And, you know, I think we've said before that we want to encourage the county to work with us on a comprehensive view of what we need to do about the revenues that are needed for our school system. But I think we need to be fair and clean and honest in how we generate that revenue. And I would not support raising it above the current fee for senior units.
All right, seeing no other discussion, we call the roll.
Can you clarify what we're calling it on, please?
It is on Delegate Hill's amendment.
To allow for the seniors to be able to go up or down, correct?
Right, to leave the
Okay.
discretion of the council
For
to
the senior
determine
housing.
whether they see enough of a nexus to.
I got it. Thank you.
Can't be called roll.
So, Senator Lamb?
No.
Delegate Hill?
Yes.
Senator Gazzoni?
I don't use these terms easily. This is, it's a no, and this is really, in my opinion, anti-senior to our community. Simple as that. And I just believe that in my heart. I can't believe that we would do this.
Senator Hester?
No.
Delegate Atterbury?
So I'm going to explain my vote. I'm going to, yes. And the word compromise has been used in this bill. This bill is not a compromise. It was initially my bill. And I thought I was making a compromise. And now all these exclusions that this body is absolutely not suited to make are being put into this bill. So I support Delegate Hill's amendment because the council is the best body to make all of these determinations.
Delegate Eversole?
No.
Delegate Feldmark?
No.
Delegate Kittleman? Delegate Miller?
No.
Delegate Pendergrass?
No, and I want to explain my vote. I want to first say that I do think we want to keep seniors in the community. But second, I want to say that when we considered this in the beginning, and sometimes I think slowly, and to come to the connections is important for me. When you close areas for development, it's done because schools are overcrowded because of the children that are generated in the community. So we put in place an adequate public facilities ordinance to build the schools that would go in the communities where the schools were the most crowded. And that would keep the development process open so the county could continue developing. And developers wouldn't be put at a standstill. The 3,000 units that may be coming online in the near future, next some number of years, would in no way impact the schools in those neighborhoods. So there is no reason to tie those units to something to keep those schools under capacity because they will have no impact on the capacity. So I'm trying to draw the circle of the logic that there was in the bill to begin with. And I hope that's helpful. I hope I did it. So my no.
Delegate Tarassa?
So I'm gonna vote yes, but explain my vote. I think this, from my perspective, is about giving the council the authority to look at this more closely. I don't think it's about keeping seniors. This is about new housing in our community. And from my perspective, my vote is about making sure that we have adequate funding for schools.
Delegate Watson, this amendment to the amendment does not pass.
I'm just gonna say one thing that related to explaining the motion, the vote failed. But I protest vehemently the suggestion that the amendment was anti-senior housing. It was very much not that, but it was about giving the council the authority and the autonomy to make the decisions that they think are best. And they have a complete understanding of the importance of senior housing to our community.
Okay. There's another, it's more or less a technical amendment that's in your packet. This was also an issue that's been brought up by Delegate Feldmark. It is listed under my name, so it is, I think, the second amendment in your packet. Under my name, it says RNC Residential U, something, floor rate index. And if Stacy, you could explain this in the clearest possible way. I know it's difficult for folks to understand because it's not in the interlineated copy, but this is an amendment to the interlineated copy.
So if you're on page 4
The interlineated.
of the interlineated copy, and you're looking at paragraph 3, which is on the last quarter of the page, just before D. And we're putting a floor on how far the rate can go, which is 132.
I'm sorry,
So-
can you say where you are?
On page 4 of the interlineated copy.
I don't have a line 3 or number?
Paragraph 3, right above D, do you see where D is?
Yes.
Okay, right above that, it says 3.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so we put a floor on that. And then there was some concern, I believe, that this would be too low in the outgoing years. So what this does is this gets indexed. So this amount, though it says 132 now, beginning in fiscal 2021, it would be indexed in the same way that the surcharge as it exists in law now was indexed. So each year it would go up by the inflation.
So it's going to index back.
So the floor, so the floor itself would continue to slowly rise, and then you would never be at a point where you're going backwards essentially after the cost of living had increased. So that's my understanding of what this does.
Delegate Feldmark, does that capture you?
Yeah, the only thing I would say is when I think that a corresponding change should be made on page 3, CI 1, Romanet 1, number 1. So the fee established, so that in the absence of any council action, it would continue to index, right? As it's drafted right now, in the absence of any council action, it's just locked in at the current rate. And I thought we should, at least in the absence of any council action, have it continue under the current system of indexing. So that was to make it for the rate if there's no action, and then the corresponding change is the floor beneath which the council should not reduce it below would continue to.
So understanding that, let me ask this, Stacy. How, if we look on page 4, the second paragraph 2, that is in the interlineated copy deleted, that was the consumer price index.
Correct.
So
When
why
the
do we?
bill was originally drafted, and that's, because it's based off the bill as it's drafted, that was already taken out because that index was replaced by the formula
Okay,
that Delegate Atterbury put in the bill.
so what is what this amendment does the same as simply taking off the,
Well, I had
The
moved it to a
deletion?
different location because in the new draft, it made much more sense in the location that I moved it to. However, if you choose to do what Delegate Feldmark has asked, then we would essentially, again,
Remove
get
those
both
brackets.
places, yeah.
And is there, what's the benefit to the way you've done it over just removing the back brackets here, if any?
None.
Okay, so I'm gonna,
Well, I mean, it has to, some of the language has to change because you're talking about references to various things, so that's.
I'm sorry, Delegate Brownson.
I just want to clarify, and I think maybe it has to do with your question. I thought I asked whether we're just putting the indexing back in.
And I'm
Which
just
is-
asking
which is
just
what
a
you were-
simpler way of putting the indexing, we
Right.
just remove the brackets.
But what I'm hearing from the folks around me here is that we are not putting the indexing back in, so now I'm confused about what we're voting on, because isn't that
Well,
what
the
you're
spell
saying?
mark is your
suggestion.
indexing is back in for the senior.
That's my question.
No, it's for the standard rate. So if you look on page 3, where we have subject paragraph 2 of the subsection, right, a school facility surcharge imposed on residential new construction shall be in an amount, number 1, equal to or greater than the amount imposed by the county council on July 1st, 2019, which Senator Lamb's prior amendment changed to June 30, 2019. That locks it in at a set rate until the council sets it otherwise. What I'm suggesting is, instead of locking it in at a set rate, we lock it in at the current system, which includes indexing, so that there is at least an incremental increase if the council doesn't take action before the beginning of the fiscal
So I
year.
apologize, that may not be what Stacy has drafted, but I think we
Yeah.
all understand what we're trying to get at.
Can I
Okay.
make a substitute motion that we have Stacy draft an amendment to follow a conceptual amendment that we'll vote on today that would put indexing as the fallback position if no action is taken.
Yes, that's what I was trying to capture in this, but I think that's a much better idea. I think this is missing. Is that clear?
Yeah, I'm kind of focused on the corner over there.
Yes.
So we're indexing the minimum. Right? The same figure applies to the senior housing ceiling. Does this capture that, or is the indexing apply to that ceiling or not?
Not as we discussed it, no.
Okay, so then here comes a can of worms, should we?
I think we should.
What?
Index the ceiling for senior housing.
Yes.
So above 32 indexed onward.
I don't think so. I thought we said not raising that.
Not indexing.
Can I just
We're not
comment? I
raising
mean,
Delegate.
the indexing was in the original bill. That was a one-time thing we did. We gave the county that impact fee and we put the indexing in. But now you're telling the council every year you go back and revisit this. And I think that supplants the need for indexing. I think you're giving the council the authority every year to adjust this. The indexing exists in a case where, in 2004, we did this bill and it's taken until 2019 to revisit it. And the indexing gave them a little bit more. But now we're at a point where every year the council's gonna be able to review this and say, we want more or we don't need more.
So, yeah, that's true when you're talking about raising. If you're talking about creating a ceiling, indexing may be more significant.
Right, so you're suggesting that maybe on the senior housing, when there's a ceiling, it gets indexed, but the other housing, it not be. Delegate Miller, do you have a thought about that?
No, I just made a standby. I think you're giving the council the authority and.
They're not on the ceiling, when you tell them they can't go up on.
Yeah, but again, there's no, like we said, I believe what Senator Guzon said is absolutely correct. There's no nexus between senior housing and school overcrowding issues. This is a fee, not a tax.
Delegate Feldmark.
Thank you. Just to Delegate Miller's point, I agree. I think visiting it annually, there's not the need for indexing. I was really focused on if the council didn't act before the beginning of the fiscal year, I was focused on, but I also think the council's probably eager to act.
I mean, the
So
minimum
it
is
may not.
2021.
So
So,
withdraw your
so
amendment.
we-
I like that.
So I'm withdrawing my amendment. Delegate Pendergrass, I think you have an amendment. Do you want to withdraw that? Or?
Yes, I would like to withdraw my conceptual amendment. I'm satisfied the way the bill is.
so Senator Hester,
Senator Hester's amendment?
Wait, can I ask something on indexing for me?
sure.
Would as drafted, can the council put indexing in? Because, I mean, to me, there is something to not having to have the full discussion of this every year, but allowing them to set an indexing, which the council does all the time, with a whole variety of
Would
issues.
you like to make a motion that we make sure as basic local language
I
to?
think they can
So-
already. I mean, in their rate setting authority, if
If they're
that's how
allowed
they want to
increase
choose to
it,
increase it,
by
then they
inflation.
set it by.
If they already have the authority, then I don't need to move it, but I would move it if
They
it's.
can't increase on senior, but they can
Next
increase
is
on.
an increase and not decrease, as history should show.
Senator Hester, you have an amendment?
Yes, thank you. So I'd like to explain the intent of my amendment.
It's in the front of your packet.
It's actually easier if you look at the interlineated copy on page 7, the work group spent a lot of time in talking about how all these factors are kind of interrelated. And this bill specifically gives them authority on the impact fee. But we all felt that looking at the entire puzzle was very important. And so in my conversations with some of the members, it appeared to me that all of these things that we outline on page 7 were things to be considered. And what I would like to avoid is being here next year without a clear direction from the council. So my amendment was to just simply give it a little bit of teeth to ask the council to report on kind of how these fit together, to report back to us, so that if we are asked to raise the transfer tax next year, we have a rationale and can follow the line of thought as to where to raise the tax. And so that was the intent of my amendment.
So right now, this language is an uncodified section, and as we know, uncodified language is notoriously difficult to find afterwards because it's not really written anywhere other than the bill or the books that come out afterwards. So what this does is it moves these considerations into codified law so they're permanent and easy to find, and it changes the reporting requirement to what it is now. But in a year in which they do pass a local law to change it, then they also have to give an explanation of how they considered each of these items in the report. So that's what her amendment does.
Okay.
And I don't want to derail the whole process, so if it doesn't move,
So I move favorable.
Second.
Discussion?
I need a question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I read the bill before I came into the meeting, the interlineated version, and I'm not reading quickly now. But my memory was that the executive was to develop a report. Is that correct? And so this adds some stuff into that report? Is that what this is doing?
It's the same report.
It's the same report, but
Right.
it adds
So the
some
way the
stuff.
bill's constructed, it has 2 reports in there because the second report was for 5 years out. But that's now changed, so it's an annual report. And it's a smaller report in years they don't pass the local law. It includes certain information, including new information from the bill on page 6, plus the one they're already required to submit to you in existing law. And this changes that in a year in which they pass the local law, they also have to include a detailed discussion on all those things that you previously had on page 7. So it just lengthens the report in a year in which they make a decision.
Thank you.
Any other discussion?
There are no other discussions. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Unanimous. Okay, so we move the bill
Second.
and the entire bill as amended.
So we don't vote the amendment?
I'm sorry, the amendment.
I thought we just did vote the amendment.
No.
Just
We
voted all the
already-
amendments. Now we're moving the work to amendment. That's what.
Oh,
The work group amendment is amended.
The interlineated.
okay.
Okay, so just to be clear, this is the interlineated amendment with all of the amendments that came after it.
Right.
Okay. Senator Lamb,
Yes.
Delegate Hill,
Yes.
Senator Gazzoni,
Yes.
Senator Hester,
yes.
Delegate Atterbury,
No.
Delegate Arbusol,
Yes.
Delegate Feldmark,
Yes, and I'd like to explain with a request. Since we are voting on an amendment that we have talked about conceptually but haven't seen, I'm hoping this can be sort of treated as a straw poll until we review it. Okay,
As an interlineated version?
Yes.
thank you. That was a yes.
Delegate Kittleman, Delegate Miller,
No.
Delegate Pendergrass,
Yes.
Delegates Rossa,
I think this puts too much restraint on the council now.
okay, and Delegate Watson. The interlineated amendment
That was
passes.
the
And that's the amendment. And I'd like to move the bill.
Second. So Kim, this is the bill as amended.
Mhm. Okay, and can you repeat who moved and seconded it?
She did, I second.
Senator Lamb,
Yes.
Delegate O,
Yes.
Senator Gazali,
Yes.
Senator Husser,
Yes.
Delegate Atterbury,
No.
Delegate Eversol,
Yes.
Delegate Feldmark,
Yes.
Delegate Kittleman, Delegate Miller,
No.
Delegate Pendergrass,
Yes.
Delegates Rossa,
Yes.
and Delegate Watson. So the bill as amended passes.
All right, thank you. So I'd like to move now to Howard County 2919, the Department of Corrections Authority to establish programs. I understand that we talked about this bill last Thursday. We had discussion.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All right, I'd like to talk about Howard County 3019, collection allocation of county transfer tax. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you. Opposed, none?
So we're not gonna vote on.
And, well, you're walking out the door. All right, so, all right, let's go to Howard County 1219. Now we've lost our quorum. Start walking. Okay.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, number of requests, yeah.